Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Chit Chat with Cass. I'm honestly super excited for today's episode. It's going to be a little bit different. Not only are we going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, but I'm also going to be featuring some special guests on today's episode. A few of my lovely viewers and/or listeners will be included in this podcast, sharing some of their own thoughts and opinions on today's topic. So, if you know anything about me, if you watch my videos, you follow me on social media, or, have listened to some of my previous podcast episodes, then you probably know that I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I've done Star Wars role plays, other content inspired by Star Wars, reviews, chats, and my dad and I are working our way through the whole saga, doing dedicated podcast episodes, chatting about each episode. So it's safe to say that I have included a galaxy far, far away in a lot of my content. And that's probably because I've pretty much grown up with Star Wars, and I've always been a fan of all of it. My dad introduced me to Star Wars when I was very young, and I've pretty much been a fan of it through childhood, teenage years, and now still into adulthood. So over the years, we of course have had peaks of popularity with this saga, if you will. I was personally not around when the original trilogy came out, but when I was first introduced to the movies, I had all three ready to watch over and over again. So that was kind of nice for my childhood. I had the original trilogy all set and ready for me to watch over and over. But I was there for the hype and the release of the prequels, Phantom Menace in '99, Attack of the Clones in 2002, and Revenge of the Sith in 2005. I remember seeing them in theaters, experiencing the craziness that is the Star Wars fame and the Star Wars fans, if you will. Now, of course, we've had another surge of Star Wars, which started with Force Awakens in 2015 and has led to this new sequel series and the other spin-off movies as well. And that's kind of what I'm going to be chatting about in this episode. Star Wars in general, the Disney purchase, the new sequel trilogy, and so on. And really the question of, did Disney ruin Star Wars? This is a highly debated topic between Star Wars fans, and I've seen people heavily for both sides of this Star Wars debate. So I thought that I would share some of my own thoughts and opinions on everything relating to Star Wars. It might be silly to put a spoiler warning in this, but I personally refuse to ruin any sort of movies for people. So yes, Star Wars. Anything is fair game. You've been warned. I have clearly seen all the new movies, Force Awakens, Rogue One, Last Jedi, and I will be seeing the coming movies as well. And most of my friends that like Star Wars have seen the new movies too. But the difference of opinion really does come quickly. You have the people who love the new movies, the people that are kind of in the middle, and then the ones that hate these new movies. Those people tend to question why I enjoy them or why I give these new movies positive reviews. And I want to dive a bit deeper into my thoughts and opinions on that because my answer isn't simply, I like the new movies, like, end of story. It's a bit more complex than that, and I have a mix of feelings that kind of depend on what part we're talking about, what character we're talking about, maybe even depends on the day, I suppose. It's very complex and not just as straightforward as I like the new movies, the end. So when I first heard the announcement that they were going to be making more Star Wars movie, a sequel series with Disney, I was super excited because I am a Star Wars fan. Duh. More content, movies, stories, of course. I'll take all of it because my mind was just swimming with the possibilities of what stories they could do, what they could bring to the big screen, and so on. I did, however, question the sale of Disney a bit. Not because I think they're bad or anything. Disney creates some really fantastic movies. I mean, look at what they've done with the Marvel movies. I think those are really fantastic. So it wasn't really the Disney issue. It was simply the idea of Star Wars being made without George Lucas. You can bash or pick apart his re-edits or his add-ons into the original trilogy, or even some of the things about the prequels. You can pick all those things apart if you want to. I do it too. Trust me, I do. Just wait until I do my Phantom Menace review. But He's still George Lucas. He created all of this. He brought this galaxy to life. So the idea of Star Wars without him was a little bit of an odd feeling when that was announced. And so it honestly had me both excited for the idea of new Star Wars movies, but a little nervous at the same time because I didn't know where they would be going with it without George Lucas. But then came the full excitement, and that was when the cast was announced. Now, I believe that Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher were announced first. I think I'm remembering that correctly. And of course, I was all on board, bringing back the original people. Yes, please. I want all of it. And then when they announced that Harrison Ford was actually going to be coming back, I about had a heart attack because I didn't see him doing that in a million years. I was so surprised. But there was the original trio coming back to this new series, and I was super pumped for that. And I really enjoyed Force Awakens. I did see it multiple times in theaters. I've watched it God knows how many times since buying it. I enjoy that movie, and once my dad and I get to that episode, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about the things that we enjoy about Force Awakens, but I am enjoying the sequel series. I promise this episode isn't just going to be all about bashing Disney, no, or praising it. I think there's a happy little medium between my feelings on the new Star Wars. I'm one of those Star Wars fans that defends not only Force Awakens, but The Last Jedi as well. However, I will not pretend like I don't have letdowns with these movies so far. A lot of my letdowns are because I was so used to the idea of what is known as the Legends now. I was very used to those storylines, the characters introduced, and so on. So while I expected the movies to be different, I was let down from losing out on so much of the things that I was really looking forward to, like the Solo twins. I really wanted Daisy to be Han and Leia's daughter. My childhood was praying for her to be their daughter, but we didn't get that. No Solo twins. While Kylo Ren is essentially Jason Solo, we didn't get the twins that I really wanted to see. That was something that when they announced it, I remembered reading about those stories and reading about those twins, and I wanted to see that on the big screen. So that was kind of a big thing for me growing up, finding out what happened after Return of the Jedi, learning about their kids or the new characters introduced, and I wanted so bad to be, for them to introduce a Jaina Solo. I wanted a Jaina Solo so bad. So when Rey wasn't anybody, my heart broke a bit. I think I would have been much happier with the introducing of Han and Leia's son and the fact that he had already turned to the dark side if he had a sister out there too. I think that would have settled my heart a little bit better. I don't know, that's just how my brain works sometimes and probably honestly still does because, I just missed the idea of Han and Leia having twins. I was also more used to the Ben Skywalker. As in Luke's son, instead of Ben Solo. I did think it was very interesting that they chose to name him that in Force Awakens, when myself and many Star Wars fans were used to Luke's son being named Ben, not Han and Leia's. Let's see, it would have also been really nice to see Mara Jade. I think that would have been a fantastic character to bring to the big screen. I really would have enjoyed just seeing her. And that's not happening. At least I don't see that happening. Not with the timeline and what they're doing with Star Wars now. I don't think we're ever gonna see Mara Jade. Poor Luke. A huge thing about this sequel series that Disney has created is the changes to Han and Leia. So, I am quite the fangirl of Han and Leia, if you will. I ship them, that terminology. And I have for years. Looking back to my favorite couples, when I was a kid or preteen, even into teen years, Han and Leia were always on my favorite character list, on my favorite couple list. They were just always on my favorites list. And I honestly think they deserved so much better. I'm watching Force Awakens, and I'm why aren't they still together? Why did they revert the character development back? Those are the type of things that I was thinking about. You know what I mean? They were doing pretty good at the end of Return of the Jedi. Why did we have to go fuck that up? I just really think that they could have been written better or handled better, and that's putting it lightly for you, because you guys should see some of the Han and Leia blogs that I follow. People are pissed at what they did to this couple. A lot of people like myself, grew up with Han and Leia as their favorite couple in movieverse and Star Wars verse and so on. And so kind of what Disney screwed up for Han and Leia, people are pissed. There was also this quote from JJ and even Adam Driver, I believe, talking some shit about how Han and Leia would have been bad parents, so that's why Ben turned to the dark side. Excuse me? Really? Gets my fists out, ready to beat some people up? Like, I hate that. I hate that that was the idea that they went with. Like, Han and Leia, just, the characters deserved so much better. And, like, Carrie and Harrison were amazing. Like, I loved seeing them come back. I thought that they went right back into their parts really well. I just wish that the story that they were given wasn't so damn tragic. Like, can we give Leia a break? Jeez. I have the Bloodlines audiobook that you would think that I would have zoomed through because it's all about Leia, you know, my favorite character. But some of the stuff, like, pains me so bad, and it's not the writing. The writing is fine. But it's, like, the stories that they chose or the way that they decided to go that just, it hurts. It just pains me so much to listen to it sometimes that I've taken breaks from this book, like, off and on forever. I don't know if I'm crazy. It kind of makes me sad, the idea of what I thought was happening after Return of the Jedi compared to what they have now said happened after Return of the Jedi. The biggest issue that I have with the sequel series, the trio was never reunited. Han, Luke, and Leia were never reunited on the big screen, and that breaks my heart. The core of my Star Wars fandom goes back to those three in New Hope. It's what I first remember seeing, and the fact that they didn't think it was important for the three of them to meet again was crushing to me. Or the fact that they went with the storylines that split them up to begin with. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that Han and Leia were apart from each other. I don't like that they hadn't seen Luke in years and years. It makes me sad that the trio had been apart for so long, and that we will never get to see the trio again. Sure, we had Han and Leia reunite, we had Luke and Leia reunite, but the three of them together, we're not going to get to see that. I mean, going into Force Awakens, I knew that Han was going to die, okay? There was no way that Harrison was going to come back for another movie, but I still felt like there wasn't enough time with them. I know I'm being, like, super picky, and that they had to introduce these new characters so that those characters could slowly take over, but I'd take a new series just focused on that trio again, and I think a lot of Star Wars fans would have. So that was a little bit of a letdown that the story they chose didn't allow the trio to be together, and that Han had to die like that, and in turn, Luke as well. Now, I'm actually a lot more open to Luke's death than a lot of fans. I know, crazy, but here's the thing. As I mentioned in my Last Jedi podcast with my dad, Luke's death felt much more peaceful. It had a purpose, if that makes sense. While Han's was like, oh, Harrison ain't coming back, we better kill him. I don't know, sometimes I feel like the arcs they went with just are odd or interesting. I don't know what the word is. But the way Luke was written, or rather his death was written, isn't really a letdown for me. So many people hate it, and I actually thought it was really good and it made sense. The big last Force projection to get the galaxy, you know, some hope again by seeing the famous Luke Skywalker, I liked it. I am hoping he'll be back as a Force ghost in the next one, because Mark Hamill is epic. I will say I think he got cheated a little bit. Like, you know, in Return of the Jedi, that's my favorite version of Luke. He's, like, really embracing his badass Jedi self. And that's my favorite version of the character. Then we skip all his Jedi-ness, and we jump to him on the island, hiding away and throwing his lightsaber over his shoulder. Like, I feel cheated with the character. We missed all the good years. I know a lot of people didn't care for the version of Luke in The Last Jedi, and I get that. You know, Luke is meant to be more of like a beacon of hope, and now he is old and grumpy and doesn't want to help and all that jazz. He's quite different. I personally like seeing different sides to characters. You know, even a character won't stay the same forever, especially when there's been a bunch of crap going on. However, I could have done without him trying to kill his nephew. You know, could have done without that. So to sum up, I enjoy Luke in The Last Jedi. Do I feel we were a bit cheated with his character? Yes, because, like, I just feel like there would have been a lot of good years between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, but who knows. But I have been defending Last Jedi for months now, so clearly I enjoyed it. So regarding Disney's Star Wars, I'm not saying that they should have directly followed the post-Jedi books or the legend stories, but more of what I was wanting or used to would have been really nice to see. It's almost as if like I was waiting years and years to see those things happen, and now it's like a parallel universe of events or something. Like, on one timeline we have Ben Solo, and on the other timeline we have Jason and Jaina Solo. It's like it splits. I've heard some interesting opinions on why they scrapped the legend stories, from wanting people to be surprised, or even the idea of not wanting to kill Chewbacca, so that's why they scrapped it all. So it could be a variety of reasons why they chose to go this new Disney route instead of like referencing some of the legend stories. But I do still really enjoy these new movies. Even with the letdowns, I still feel like I can enjoy the movie and the new characters that they've introduced. I'm always going to want more of the original characters, but I do enjoy the new ones as well. Force Awakens is actually pretty high on my Star Wars ranking list. It does have the disappointments, or the letdowns, if you will, and I sometimes wonder if that's because I set myself up for that. Like, I set myself up to see the things I already knew, when in reality I should have prepared myself to see new storylines instead. And yes, I know Force Awakens is a hell of a lot like A New Hope, but I'm weird, I guess. I enjoy parallel storylines, or the ideas of kind of history repeating or mocking the present. I enjoy stories like that. So the similarities between episode 4 and episode 7 did not bother me like it did some people. I love the different versions of Star Wars for different reasons, if that makes any sense. I will always hold the idea of the trio staying together, the Solo twins, Luke and Mara Jade, and so on, very close to my heart, because after seeing the original trilogy, those are the stories that I thought would happen. That's what happened after Endor. I will always reference those ideas in those stories as well. But at the same time, I can also enjoy and appreciate the new take on Star Wars with what Disney has done. I admit that there are letdowns, and there are things that I really wish that we could have seen. But I do have to praise the moment that I love within the new movies as well. It's a mix of feelings, and I see myself enjoying both versions. So, as I said at the beginning, my answer is more complex. Yes, I enjoy the Disney movies, these new movies. Are they absolutely perfect? No, because I have letdowns here, or things I would have seen here. But I allow myself to enjoy both the Disney canon and the legend stories as well. Is the writing just where I want it? No. Like, Rey being no one is still gonna bother me forever unless they fix it. Like, what type of bullshit answer is that? We spend all of Force Awakens wondering who the hell this girl is, for them to have her be no one? I think that was like a horrible choice, and I wonder if they'll fix it, or if they'll just leave like it as a disappointing option. It'll be very curious to see how that next one goes. Oh, and of course we have like Rogue One being a side Disney movie. It was also pretty good, but being totally honest, I'm not a huge fan of the pacing of the beginning of that movie. I haven't done a dedicated Rogue One podcast yet, so that will be coming as well, and I'll go more in depth with it, but just to briefly talk about it, I'd much rather skip to the second half of Rogue One. I'm not sure if it was the rewrites or the reshoots, but the flow of the movie feels a bit off to me. But at the same time, I enjoy seeing a movie that sums up the scroll at the beginning of New Hope. And I do really need to say that I think that these new movies are beautiful. The perfect use of practical effects and green screen. They just look so nice and visually pleasing. Not all green screen like the prequels. At the time of recording this podcast, I have not seen Solo. I believe that it comes out this week. I will be seeing it in theaters, even though that movie worries me. It worries me so much. It's worried me since they announced it. and that's the thing. I will see any new Star Wars movie. Am I excited for the Solo movie? If you follow me, you probably know that, I would love for it to be really good. But I also have a bad feeling about this one, guys. Pun intended. And we also have, the Boba Fett movie coming out, which I truly have no interest in. Will I see it? Yes. Am I jumping up and down with excitement? No. I truly don't see a need for that movie. And that kind of leads us to my other thought is I do worry that Disney will do too much with Star Wars. I mean, we have these side films now, you know, the Solo movie's coming out soon, then Boba Fett. We are meant to be getting the Obi-Wan movie as well, which I will be excited for if they cast Ewan McGregor. If they don't cast him, then I'll be pissed off and I won't want to see the movie, even though I'll see it anyway. But then we have the new trilogy that's going to be coming out that we don't really know much about. It's supposed to be in a galaxy far, far away, but away from the Skywalkers and so on. You know, whatever they're planning there. And then we're also going to be getting like a Star Wars TV show coming out, and not like a Clone Wars or a Rebels show, like a live action Star Wars show as well. And it's a lot. You know, I do worry that sometimes maybe it will be too much. Disney paid a pretty penny for the rights to this, and now they're going to milk it for as long as they can. And I mean, Star Wars isn't losing money. Their numbers are doing great. It just, you know, it worries me sometimes that it will be overdone and that they will do too much. And it doesn't really matter what they create, nothing is going to beat the originals. To be honest, I am extremely nervous for the next movie, Episode 9. They had it all planned out, and it was meant to have, like, Leia front and center. Let's just break my heart into a million pieces. After losing Carrie, now they're going to have to change and rework everything, and that just worries me. Not only am I worried with what they will do with Leia, I mean, this is my favorite childhood character here. You better give her some sort of good send-off. I don't know, like, how you're gonna do it, but you better do something. But now that they have to do that, like, how much needs to be changed and how much needs to be rewritten? It makes me just, like, so sad that Leia never got, like, a proper scene with Ben, you know, and we won't get to see the storyline that they had created where Leia was, like, the lead of that movie. Like they say, Harrison had Force Awakens, Mark had Last Jedi, and Carrie should have had the next one. And there goes my heart, shattered into a million pieces again. She better get a better send-off than, like, the opening crawl having it say, like, oh, by the way, Princess Leia died. Like, hell no. Let's not do that. That would be total bullshit, and I would be so mad. It's going to sound, like, really depressing, but depending on how they handle Leia in the next movie, it might be, like, the sadness all over again for me. So, I'm a huge Carrie Fisher fan. I have a quote from her tattooed on my wrist here. You know, her death was so heartbreaking, and I was just gutted for her daughter, Billy. The idea of potentially having to lose Leia or saying goodbye to that character as well, that character that's been a favorite of mine practically my whole life, like, that might have me crying in the theater, guys. Might not be good. But yes, I enjoy the Legend stories. I enjoy the new movies. The Legends weren't perfect, and neither are these new movies. I like each of these stories, ideas, movies for their own reasons. Alright, so now we are going to move into the lovely guests of this podcast episode. I asked 3 questions to each of these people because I really wanted to show different opinions on this Star Wars topic, different fans' thoughts and ideas with these questions. Show different Star Wars fans and how they feel. So I asked them, 1, what is your opinion of the Disney version of Star Wars? 2, would you have preferred the Legend stories to be brought to the big screen? And 3, has Disney ruined Star Wars? So I'm going to go ahead and share some of their thoughts, and I'm going to be replying back to them. Okay, we're going to do Alex first.
Hi, Cassie. Thanks for having me on your podcast. This is really exciting. I mean, I'm a huge fan of your content, but nothing personal. I am a huger fan of Star Wars, so I figure this is the best of both worlds. So I'll just get right into it. Your first question was, what's my opinion on the Disney Star Wars? Well, I think Episode 7 was pretty good, but it mirrored A New Hope too closely, and that's pretty much what everybody's been saying, so that's really not news. But I also didn't really like the way Rey suddenly mastered the Jedi mind trick when Luke could barely move a lightsaber to save his ass on Hoth after having some training by Obi-Wan. It just doesn't make sense. I feel that movie played a lot more like a video game where, you know, as time goes on, you develop your powers. It didn't feel like someone sort of falling into learning this. She should have maybe been able to do something minor at most. but I felt like they were just trying to rush the plot. So that I didn't like, but it was still an okay movie. I was pretty happy with it. Episode 7 had its moments, but I was sort of underwhelmed and felt it stretched with the whole Force thing a bit too far. Because nowhere in established canon were the Jedi able to do things like float through space, like Leia did, without any training, or project themselves across vast distances. It just seemed like too much of a stretch. I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible, but I feel like they jumped from one extreme where it was just, moving objects and mind tricks to just these superhuman abilities. I just felt it was just too much of a jump, and it was a little bit unrealistic within the context of that universe. Rogue One, I really liked that movie, but I felt it missed a huge opportunity. We actually already have a story about how the Death Star plans were stolen. Cassie, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the video games, but back in the 90s, the Star Wars PC games were at their height. They made so many amazing games. I miss those days. I still have some of those games downloaded on Steam because I can never give them up. But at that point, a game came out called Dark Forces, which is a shooting game where you play as Kyle Katarn. He's an Imperial agent turned mercenary, and there have been books about him as well. Later on, he goes on to become a Jedi, and it just sort of goes from there in future games. But in this one, the rebels sent him to recover the plans from an Imperial base. And so this story was literally dropped in Disney's lap, and an iconic character could have been brought to the big screen. Instead, they went out of their way to make sure that the story was different and filled with these cliche stock characters, like the blind guy with the staff and the big bulky guy with the huge gun. It reeked of the modern movie-making practices of these predictable, reusable characters. And it just felt like a cardboard cutout. But I think the worst thing is that they cast a female lead simply because they knew it would gain them brownie points. And I know you're probably thinking that might not sit well with some people, but the issue here that I had with them doing this was that they were basically taking an issue like women's rights or women's representation in movies and milking it for personal gain. They weren't legitimately trying to make a statement or fight against this supposed trend that's going on. They instead did it because they knew it would sell them more seats. And I find that disgusting. It's a serious issue, and I don't think it should be used as a tool like this, as a marketing tool, basically. But that doesn't really surprise me, because my biggest gripe with Disney is that they see the movies as a business. George Lucas pretty much went the same way with his prequels, and it showed. When the original trilogy came out, George Lucas was sort of a rebel. No pun intended there. He refused to adhere to some of the strict guidelines imposed by Hollywood, so disassociated himself from them and went his own way. But Disney pretty much did the opposite. Their movies aren't based on stories or artistic creativity. They're meant to appeal to as many people as possible. They do things like market research to see what's most likely to catch people's attention. And that's where these things like the forced female lead in Rogue One came from. So, yeah, screw you, Mickey Mouse. And your next question, would you prefer the legend stories be brought to the big screen? Definitely no, and here's why. It's a pretty universal law that movies based on books won't ever measure up their source material. And because artistic liberties need to be taken if the story's too long, or sometimes entire characters are changed just because the movie makers don't feel it works, or it might just cause the plot to expand in ways they don't want. So the only thing I do say I would have liked to see from the Legends be brought into these movies is Han and Leia's kids to be the same as in the books. The Jason, Jaina, and Anakin, I believe, were their names. Mm-hmm. And instead they gave us this stupid emo crybaby who can't hold his own against a newbie. It was kind of insulting, but whatever. Some people like him. I frankly don't. I wouldn't be scared of him. I'd be more scared of a beetle, to be honest.
I love it.
And I'm not scared of beetles. But case in point, the two kids in the original Jurassic Park movie, the older girl and the younger boy? Well, in the book, it's the boy who's older and the girl's younger. And why they changed this, I have no idea, but it's stupid and just a classic example of how arbitrary some of these changes can be. The books created some great spin-off video games, but that's because movie-based video games keep the theme, but often stick very loosely to the source material. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it bombs. But I think it has a much better success rate than turning books into movies, as we've clearly seen. Because games have to turn this stuff into missions and fighting and puzzles and that sort of thing. So they get to decide what the gameplay is like. They get to control the direction, the flow of the game. They're not expected to literally create a digital version of the same movie. That's what I'm saying. But actually, kind of an aside about the Legends being adapted, there's this really old Star Wars flying game called TIE Fighter, and that's where you play as the pilot for the Empire. So you fly TIE Fighters and other Imperial ships. And at one point, the story actually moves to Vice Admiral Thrawn, and you might know him as Grand Admiral Thrawn from the books. I read them, I just don't remember what their names were. But I also know we have Shadows of the Empire for the N64 and the PC, but this one was just sort of a more subtle reference, so I figured I'd just bring that up, and it's just an example of how it indirectly told Thrawn's backstory while involving you in the process. I think that's kind of cool. And your final question here was, has Disney ruined Star Wars? I think ruined is kind of a harsh term. Disney did a great job of creating a future Star Wars universe, but I think the problem is we had all these different ideas stemming from the Legends, or just the past movies. Even as a kid, after seeing, episode 4 for the first time, I had an idea as to where Anakin had come from. And my idea of his backstory was so different than the ones that they portrayed in the movies. My idea was that when Obi-Wan met Anakin, he would have been a great pilot, like it was described in episode 4, but he would have already been married and obviously not had any kids yet, but I felt it would have picked up better there. But that's just me, and that's just the image I got in my head. And I think a lot of people just had radically different ideas about the next few movies based on the Legends or based on the previous films. So it's impossible to please everybody. And the problem is Disney tried to do it in the worst possible way. I know that sounds like I just basically said Disney ruined Star Wars, but again, I'm not saying that they completely ruined it. They do have some redeeming qualities. But another problem I had, and I know I touched on this earlier, they're inserting political messages and agendas into their work, and only so that they'll be safe from backlash and, again, make more money. I don't appreciate that. I think that's dumb. But, like I said before, Disney is all about business. There's no reason why they can't create a great movie, even within the confines of their creative rules, but that's second to the main goal of making money. And I get it. I have no problem with businesses making money, but not at the expense of such an iconic series. They're doing a disservice to their fans. They're just not respecting the people that fill those seats and make them that money, which I find kind of funny and kind of sad at the same time. I will give them points, however, though, for at least relying way less on special effects and ditching the choreographed lightsaber battles we all complained about in the prequels. They knew these weren't well received, so at least they listened there, because, I don't want to imagine what it must have been like to be an actor during the prequels. I remember seeing a snippet where Ewan McGregor was talking about how it's like to have to basically talk to thin air, and he literally said it's a nightmare. And, it probably was. So I'm glad they at least tried to rely a lot less on special effects for their environments and things like that. That was a good move on their part. But, so basically I just want to say I am disappointed in the direction that Disney has taken, but I'm not horribly disillusioned. I think they can make some great movies if they try, but I really hope that one day they actually step out of their comfort zone and play around a bit. That's what George Lucas did in the original trilogy, and look how that worked out for him. Didn't work so well later, but again, that's what happens when you turn art into a business. So that about wraps up my speech for you there. I hope it wasn't too long. And again, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I really look forward to hearing this, and I really appreciate all your work you do. And keep it up. So hopefully I'll be able to help you again soon.
All right. Thank you, Alex, for taking part in this podcast. So I kind of jotted down a couple different things as you were giving your opinions, so I'll just touch on those. First of all, don't worry, I'm a much bigger fan of Star Wars than I am of myself as well. So, let's see. The mirrored New Hope and Force Awakens, as I had briefly said, it doesn't bother me too much because I enjoy the parallel stories or things of that nature in a multiple of different fandoms. Rey learning the Force too fast and your video game reference, that actually makes a lot of sense, you know, as you go further into the video game, like, your powers get stronger. And I don't know if they were trying to, like, make her be different from the past Jedis that I've seen, that she was just much more of a natural at it and she didn't need training. You know, people always make that joke that, like, Jedi's training gets shorter and shorter. First, you have, like, in the prequels, like, all these Jedi that train for years. Then you have Luke, he trains on Dagobah for like 40 minutes. And then you have Rey that barely trains at all. So people like to make that joke. As for, like, the Force powers, I understand what you're saying about, like, kind of how they've changed or grown, like, drastically. Doesn't bother me too much, like, the Force projection stuff. I actually enjoy that, or, like, you know, Leia flying through the sky. I'm actually one of the people that enjoy that because I wanted Leia to be able to use the Force. But those type of things don't bother me too bad. The PC game reference that you set up with the Death Star plans, I was not familiar with that. I have some Star Wars video games, but not all of them or any of, like, the computer games, really. So I'm not familiar with that storyline. So that's interesting that there was already one in place, and then they kind of did something different. As for Rogue One, I actually completely agree with you on the female lead thing. I'm all for strong female characters. You know, a lot of my favorite characters are inspired by the fact that I grew up with Princess Leia being, like, a strong female character. But for Rogue One, Jyn Erso kind of fell short for me, and I actually had, you know, the blind guy, Jarrett, was actually my favorite character in Rogue One. It wasn't Jyn Erso, because I feel like her character was very lacking, that they didn't put much into it. It was just, oh, let's put another female lead in here, and of course she has to be a white brunette girl because that's what Star Wars does. And so I understand where you're coming from about kind of just throwing in, like, the female lead there. I just don't know if they put enough thought into her character, and we only get her for, like, the one movie. It didn't seem like enough. I do also agree with you that, like, you know, Disney is all about making money. It is a business. So the things that they're going to put into movies and things like that are going to be what they think the most people will want. Not necessarily, like, maybe the hardcore fans. They want to appeal to the whole audience of moviegoers. So I definitely agree with that. And your comment on, like, the books won't measure up, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like I said, I don't know if I would have wanted, like, complete legend stories to be completely remade into the movies, but, like, little bits I would have liked to have seen. But you are right, because movies that are made from books are never as good as the books. Like, that's just, like, common knowledge with everything. But like you said, I would have liked to have seen, you know, Jason and Jaina and Anakin solo. Those are the type of things that I wanted to see. And your comment on the emo Kylo Ren, I could not agree more. I know that so many people love Kylo Ren, and I do enjoy Adam Driver's performance. Is Kylo Ren my favorite character? No, not by a long shot. And I do, like, find his little emo bits to be comical instead of, like, compared to Darth Vader, where Darth Vader walks into a room, you're supposed to be terrified. Kylo Ren walks into a room and you're like, oh god, what emo bit is he gonna pull now? I really enjoyed your thoughts on the Anakin differences, like what you had in your mind of what Anakin was like before Obi-Wan found him compared to what they did in the prequels. And that makes a lot of sense, you know, like when you're seeing the originals, you have the idea of who Anakin Skywalker was, and then when the prequels came out, that could be different. And it's kind of like this sequel series. We had the ideas of what happened after Return of the Jedi, and then the new movies come out, and it's slightly different than what we thought or imagined to happen. So I love that you brought that up. I thought that was a really great point. And of course, I do agree as well that it is impossible to please everyone, especially when we're talking about Star Wars fans, because let's be honest, Star Wars fans can be so picky. Like, let's not forget what they did to that poor child that played young Anakin Skywalker. Everyone was such douchebags to that poor kid. So once again, thank you so much, Alex, for sharing your thoughts and opinions on Star Wars. Let's go ahead and move on to my friend Ralph here. And he is going to share some of his thoughts and opinions as well. He was actually one of the first people I asked for this because I know that he has very strong opinions about the new series, and I wanted to have his opinion included in this podcast. So let's go ahead and listen to his thoughts on my 3 questions.
Star Wars. Disney Star Wars. I'm going to answer some questions that I got here. And yeah, the first question: what is your opinion of the Disney version of Star Wars? I think they missed the opportunity to do something really good with the sequel trilogy. I think they moved the perspective from the Skywalkers to 3 new characters who are really boring. What they should have done is to focus the new trilogy on the 3 heroes that we love, which is Han Solo, Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, and make them go on a final adventure, and then start up a new saga with the new characters, if they wanted to. They could have called it the Star Wars Legacy or something. I'm not fond of Disney Star Wars at all. The second question: would you have preferred the legend stories to be brought to the big screen? Not necessarily all of them. There are so many to choose from, and they are contrary to each other, contradicted to each other sometimes. But yeah, you know, the story about Solo's kids, Ben and Jackin, is that their name? I'm not that familiar with the now not canon Star Wars stories, but yeah, it would have been better than the ones we have now, I think, because that is the same characters that we loved from our childhood. And third, have Disney ruined Star Wars for you? It all depends from a certain point of view. If you can accept that the Star Wars saga stopped with episode 6, Return of the Jedi, and that the other Disney stories are non-canon, then no. But if you have to accept the new sequel trilogy, then yes, because I can never look at Luke Skywalker again without knowing him turning on Ben in his sleep, trying to kill him because he sensed something bad about him. It's just ridiculous. I can never watch Han Solo again without knowing his whole arc of being a hero was thrown away, and he became like this cynic smuggler and then died totally like a wimp. So it depends on a certain point of view. Yes, I would say Star Wars is destroyed by Disney, and especially Ryan Roundhead Johnson, because The Last Jedi was a travesty. Can J.J. Abrams save the Star Wars sequel trilogy? I don't think so. I think the damage have been done in a too much bigger scale. Luke Skywalker have been degraded and dead. We now know that Carrie Fisher has passed away, God bless her, and Han Solo is dead. So, unless... And Snoke, the Snoke arc was destroyed by Roundhead Johnson. Rey's parents are nobodies. If JJ makes a 360 and kind of like ignores what Johnson did with The Last Jedi. Maybe it can be a savable, but actually I don't think so. For me, Star Wars ended on the forest moon of Endor, with the Empire destroyed and everyone lived happy ever after. And that's my take on it.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and opinions. He's actually Duke Doom on YouTube. If you guys watch ASMR videos, you should definitely check his out. So I can understand your opinion. Trust me, I have days where I feel like you as well. I will say that I understand the way that they had to move it away from the Skywalkers, but I don't like it at the same time. They had to introduce these new characters, but instead I like your idea of doing another trilogy or whatnot of like the idea of the final adventure with Han and Leia and Luke, and then like doing a further like, you know, introduce to new characters, younger characters and whatnot in a different trilogy. I really like that, and I think it would have given more time to conclude like the characters that we love so much in like a more positive way, instead of a rushed, oh, we gotta kill Han, oh, we gotta kill Luke, and now Carrie's gone, so what are we gonna do with Leia? Like, instead of having it be so rushed, I do like that idea of just having more time to conclude those characters that we loved so much. And you bring them back, and then like their rushed endings can just be kind of painful on the heart of the Star Wars fan, right? I also agree with like your certain point of view, separating like the Return of the Jedi ending and it ending there with them happy on Endor, things like that, and separating it from the Disney canon. And I do that sometimes too. Like I said, sometimes I will continue to reference like the more like legend things of like, you know, them after Endor and like some of the stories that followed that, and other days I will, you know, be more on the Disney side. Just kind of depends. It's like a nice little mix of emotions. I also agree with you on the whole Luke thinking about killing Ben or wanting to stop him. I think that was a very odd choice for the character, and it was probably one of the more disappointing moments for me for Last Jedi. While I do defend that movie, I just don't think that really made sense, especially when you compare Luke Skywalker to the guy that was trying to save Darth Vader. Like, Darth Vader has been doing all this crazy shit across the galaxy, and he still feels good in him, so we should, you know, try and save Darth Vader. But your young nephew, you're just gonna kill because he might be bad. You know, I just don't think that that was a good storyline decision, especially for Luke's character, so I do agree with you on that. Same with, like, where they're going with the next one. A lot of the things that they did in Last Jedi, while I enjoyed the movie, it's like, where do we go from here? Like, you cut off the Snoke storyline. We don't even know really who Snoke was, and now we've killed him. The whole Rey's parents bullshit, where she's nobody, which I still really don't like. Where do they go with the next one? So it will be extremely interesting to see where J.J. Abrams takes the next movie and how they're going to conclude things for this sequel trilogy. So once again, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and opinions on that. Next up, we are going to listen to Joe's opinions.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Cassie, for allowing me to contribute some input to your podcast here. So the Disney version of Star Wars, I don't hate it. When I got out of seeing The Force Awakens, what I had said to some friends who asked my opinion on it was good, but it wasn't really anything new to the Star Wars universe. It was a lot of familiar material, and it kind of felt like a retread of the story that we already know. I kind of liken it to the Muppets. I was a fan of the Muppets from a very young age. I was born in 1979, so when I was very young, I had the Muppet Show and Fraggle Rock and the Muppet Movie and the Muppets Take Manhattan, which were some of my favorite things to watch. When Jim Henson died, I've long felt that the best part of the Muppets kind of died with him, and that everything they've done since then hasn't been as good because it hasn't had his soul in it. Now, thankfully, George Lucas isn't dead, but I feel similarly about Star Wars. Without his involvement, it doesn't have that same feel to it. Especially because, good or bad, when he was doing the prequel films, he knew from the beginning where he was going with them, and it doesn't seem like Disney has any kind of goal as to where they're taking Star Wars. with the current run of movies. I know George Lucas has never been a perfect writer or director, but Star Wars is the universe that he created, and I think it very unlikely that anybody's going to be able to deal with it as well as he did. I really liked Rogue One. That was the movie so far that they've done the best job of actually making it feel like a movie that's set in that universe with characters that live in that universe. The Last Jedi had a lot of problems. I won't say that I disliked it. I really liked Rey and Kylo Ren's storylines, and those two fighting what I refer to as the Red Team was really, really good, and I probably saw the movie at least 3 extra times than I might otherwise have just to watch that again. So, the Legends stories. I don't really see how they could have done those stories as movies. The Star Wars films that we have are episodic, in that they generally are contained into a few days or whatever the time frame of The Empire Strikes Back was. Let's not even get into that. But a lot of the Legends stories span much longer periods of time and would have had to become their own trilogies in their own right, and there's just way too many of them to pick just a few and kind of sit down and make those into movies. And you also have kind of a logical drawback of, at that point, you're getting people into theaters for stories they already know. As much as a lot of people didn't like The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi and what they did with those characters, I think there could have been an even larger backlash if they had told stories that people are already familiar with and really love, and in certain people's points of view, told them wrong. At the same time, I think it's a real shame that they've gotten rid of a lot of those stories. I'm especially a fan of some of the prequel and pre-prequel era things. The Clone Wars books and comic books and video games had a lot of really good stories that enriched what was going on at the time. The Darth Bane trilogy is my favorite group of Star Wars books, and really enriches the history of the war between the Jedi and the Sith, which has always been my favorite part of Star Wars. The Jedi and Darth Vader and Yoda, Obi-Wan, all of that. Generally that story of how the Sith toppled the Jedi and set up the Empire, and then how and why Luke Skywalker was able to defeat the Emperor and redeem Darth Vader. I really feel cheated, because I invested a lot of time and energy and money into those stories, and now it's like they don't exist anymore, or that they're just folk tales from a galaxy far, far away. So I can see why some people would have wanted to see those stories turned into movies, but at the same time, I also understand how it wasn't practical. Has Disney ruined Star Wars? No. No more than the prequels ruined Star Wars. And I've been hearing people say that for almost 20 years now. Disney has made Star Wars movies that people don't like, and they've diminished certain people's interest in Star Wars, and in some cases have caused some people to just kind of throw up their hands and say I'm completely done, which I personally don't understand, but I will be the first to admit that in the past few years, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Universe, and especially Deadpool, have kind of overtaken place in my interest that Star Wars used to kind of have a monopoly on. But no, making some movies that I don't like, in my opinion, doesn't ruin Star Wars for me. I think it's cool to kind of hate on Disney and just go on and on about how evil they are for some reason. And I'm sorry if people are walking away from Star Wars because of what Disney's done, but can't please all the people all the time. And given the amount of money that the movies are making, they're clearly pleasing a lot of people. And also, whatever else Disney has done with Star Wars since they bought it out, they've given us porgs. And porgs are awesome. Okay, so I hope that helps. And again, thank you very much for giving me a chance to help you out there. Have a great day.
All right, thank you so much, Joe. Yes, Disney gave us porgs, everyone. All right, so yes, we've touched on the familiar material with Force Awakens, and people will either love or hate that there is similarities between Episode 4 and Episode 7. I do agree with you with the lack of George Lucas. As I kind of said, you know, it was worrisome when it was announced to me. I do pretty much agree with you on the lack of George Lucas, and as I said, like when it was announced that they were selling and that Disney was going to buy it and George Lucas was no longer going to be a part of Star Wars, that was very worrisome to me, and I kind of wonder if things kind of went a little bit off kilter because you didn't have kind of George's direction of things, I guess. And like you said, you know, even if you don't like the prequels, George Lucas had an idea of where the prequels were going. Like, he knew in his mind the storylines and everything, and I do question as well, does Disney know where they're taking these things? Did they sit down and, like, have it all planned out and know that, you know, Rey was going to be a nobody or all of these things? And even if they did have it planned out at this point where they have to rewrite the next one because no Princess Leia, like, how are they handling that? Did they have a real plan, or were they just doing as much as they could to please as many moviegoers as possible? So Rogue One, like I said, I have like hits and misses with Rogue One. I really enjoyed the second half of that movie, and it does feel like it fits in that universe. It is a war movie. Like, that's what it is. It's not like, it's very different from some of the other Star Wars films, because it is a war movie. But some of the pacing and some of the characters with it doesn't catch me, doesn't put it right towards the top of my ranking list, but I do enjoy the second half of that movie, like I said. You touched on Rey and Ben in, like, the Red Room, or the Throne Room, or whatever you want to call it. That's probably one of my favorite parts in Last Jedi. Like, one of those parts that I just think was so well done, and, you know, is one reason that I like that movie. Let's see, I also agree with you that, like, the Legends are too long. Like, yes, there are a lot of storylines, and that's kind of like, you know, why I understand that they couldn't do, like, exactly what the Legends had, but just, like, pieces. And that granted would have taken a lot of work to pull which pieces they wanted. And as you said, and some other people have said as well, like, people already knew the stories. So there was way more pressure to get those right if they went with the Legends stories. So that does make sense. It's just part of my, like, heart, like, wants, like, some of those pieces that I was really looking forward to seeing that we didn't get. And also, you are correct, people have been saying that Star Wars has been ruined for years because of the prequels. I've heard that for many, many years as well, and I don't think that any Star Wars film now is ever going to top the originals. Everyone is so set in loving those original 3 movies that anything made after is going to not compare. And I remember all the hate that the prequels got, and now in turn, the Disney ones are getting it. So I have heard similar comments that the prequels already ruined Star Wars, compared to, like, you know, Disney ruining Star Wars. So I have heard those similar comments as well. And, you know, Star Wars fans are picky, guys. You know, they really, truly are. And as a few of us have said, you cannot please everyone. So thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your thoughts and opinions on this Star Wars episode. Next up, we're going to hear Brian's thoughts.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Massey, and I am a contributor on CastawayStudios.com. I do shows like BGN, Boldly Going Nowhere, and I also do a Star Trek podcast as well. And we talk about Star Wars there all the time as well, so why not? I was asked to do this by Cassie, and here's my opinion on the Disney era Star Wars. Please mind my voice. Sorry, I know it's kind of froggy. I don't know why, but, you know, it's going to be like this the whole time that I'm talking, so sorry. Alright, so what is my opinion of the Disney version of Star Wars? It's a bit rough. It's not what I was expecting necessarily. I definitely think that they're trying to throw a bunch of different curves. And it might not necessarily be what the audience is expecting, but at the same time, I don't know, I feel like at this point, it's kind of a victim of its own, I don't know, well-being as such a huge franchise for such a long period of time. I mean, it's a language that I spoke when I was a kid, for God's sakes, and that was like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So it's been around for a long time, and it has been a massive part of everybody's life for a long time, and that might be the problem that Disney has, personally. Said that my own personal opinion of the Disney version of Star Wars is that I really loved The Force Awakens. I thought it was a great way to reintroduce the core concept of what Star Wars was to a new generation of audiences, while also being able to, like, bring back, you know, Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher for one last run. I thought that was really cool. It feels like they're definitely trying to set up a new franchise and a way to just kind of branch off from everything that we've known beforehand, which is kind of why The Last Jedi was such a head-scratcher, actually. The Last Jedi was good, I think. It was about The Last Jedi, it wasn't confusing because the story is very concise. But what was really odd to me was the idea that there's no more Jedis. The concept that the Jedi and the Sith are going away, almost as like the studio's going, hey, we really don't want to do this anymore. We still want Star Wars, and we still want, like rogues, and we want, stormtroopers, and we want, the battle between the Resistance and the First Order and all that stuff. That's cool, but we can lose the Jedi and Sith, at least like the way that Lucas used to do it, which is kind of beguiling to me, but I don't know. I just have to accept it, I guess. Question 2, would you have preferred the Legend stories to be brought to the big screen? Yes and no. I know that a lot of people really love those books, and unfortunately I didn't get to read nearly as many books on Star Wars as I would have liked to. I've heard of the Thrawn trilogy. I'm actually currently reading a Palpatine book that's really good that takes place in the Legends era, and of course, how could I not be familiar with the whole, like, Chewbacca saves Han's son, and then in the meantime, because he does so, winds up dying by having a planet crash on him, and he screams. Like, how cool would that have been as, like, a final send-off to Chewie? He said that, I mean, the best example that I have as to, like, why they didn't do it and why it kind of makes sense, I mean, look at Marvel real fast. Yes, it's owned by Disney as well, but look at how the Netflix series are supposed to be connected to the MCU, but the MCU just obviously doesn't give a crap. And it almost feels like, you have the Netflix shows which are secondary, at best to the MCU, and they're still great. They're still great stories. But if, the main franchise isn't going to be bothered with trying to integrate those stories, then why bother? Okay, fine. And with Legends, it goes back for years, and trying to sort all that stuff out, and there's so much contradictory stuff that I just don't think it would have worked, personally. And finally, question number 3, has Disney ruined Star Wars? I don't think that they have. I think that, I don't know, it's kind of funny. I still go back to, like, the Mr. Plinkett reviews, and it's so funny that, like, that the whole basis of his argument was, like, with the prequels, I don't like things that are different. So then, it's funny then that Episode 7 comes out, and it's literally almost beat for beat a rehash of A New Hope. So it's more of the same, and then we get something different with The Last Jedi, and it just seems like, at this point, people are just complacent, because in their minds, they think they know what Star Wars is. And believe me, I'm not trying to be pretentious when I say they think they know what Star Wars is, but I will say this much. I started watching Star Wars back in, like, 95. I have a very clear idea of what Star Wars is, because I grew up with A New Hope, Empire, and Jedi, much like a lot of other people did. And I had the Hasbro, Power of the Force figures. So I was kind of like a second generation or even a third generation. Actually, I was a second generation of Star Wars fan almost. You know what I mean? Like, I was part of this new era where it was like, oh, they're getting re-released, and then they were hyping them up for the special editions, and then we're going to do the prequels. I was part of that generation where interest started coming back up, and then, they're going to do all this new stuff. And if I'm being completely honest, it feels like, that's kind of what Lucasfilm was doing in the first place with the prequels. So I don't know why anybody in their right mind would think that they've ruined Star Wars. Disney certainly has not ruined Star Wars. They've introduced new characters, and they might be pushing beliefs and a story that 30 years ago might have been unthinkable, but now it's like a part of progress, I guess. And, it's better representation for people, sure, that's fine. It's also a new way of telling stories. You cannot take the script from A New Hope, in my opinion, and make it today and get a good movie, because it was a completely different thing then. And directors are going to interpret that differently, I think. So, honestly, I think that, the Disney Star Wars movies are kind of products of their time, to be perfectly honest with you. If anything, I don't think Disney has ruined Star Wars. it looks okay, I guess. And after that, I think we're getting, episode 9, and then we're getting some other movies as well. I think we might be getting either a Boba Fett movie or an Obi-Wan movie. One of the reasons why I think the Disney acquisition was so successful, look at movies like Rogue One. Rogue One, that, in my opinion, is a fan film that is also a Star Wars film that was produced by a studio, which is really cool. When you really look at Rogue One, it's almost like someone who was a kid a long time ago, in a basement far, far away, had an idea for Rogue One or something. There had to have been multiple kids who were like, okay, they got the plans for the Death Star. How did they get that? And, be it through writing down something on paper or playing a role-play game or doing something with your action figures, you came up with a story. And, it had to have been of, all these people, going out and trying to get the plans for the Death Star, and they're kind of roguish, and they're kind of, doing underhanded things that our main heroes at the time weren't really wanting to do, nor would their character allow them to do that. And by putting these people in this scenario and making this movie like this, it really does feel like, the Star Wars film that's also based on a D&D session or something. It just feels like, all right, I'm going to be, this guy, and I'm going to roll for initiative, and I'm a blind monk who believes in the Force. Stuff like that, man. How cool was that idea? But going back to whether or not Disney destroyed Star Wars, I severely disagree with that. I mean, crap, they're putting in that Star Wars park at Disney World, so obviously they've made enough money to do that, and I don't know, I think Disney's doing a good job. The toy sales aren't that good, but that's a completely different discussion, and I'd love to have that with you sometime, maybe. All right, have a good one.
All right, thank you so much, Brian, for sharing your thoughts and answering those questions for this podcast. So I like that you said that perhaps, Star Wars has been around too long, or, you could even say it has too many fans. So you're already risking a little bit by diving into that world because you have to please so many people. We've, of course, said you can't please everybody, but Star Wars has been around for a really long time, and it has quite the following. The removing of, the Jedi and Sith from Star Wars is something that is also, I'm curious to see what they do in the next one. Are we going to continue with that at the same time? Luke and Yoda are saying it's time for the Jedi to end, things like that, but then Rey steals the Jedi books. So will she create her own new Jedi thing, and we aren't really getting rid of the Jedi? It's very questionable with how they're going to go further into episode 9. I'm thinking that a lot of us are having the same thoughts on the Legends. We're all very similar in yes and no. We like pieces of it, but it would be very difficult to integrate everything and things of that nature. I think a lot of us are on the same page with that. And we keep mentioning the Marvel movies as well, and I do like what you said about the Marvel verse kind of ignoring the Netflix shows type of thing. That does make sense. It's a good point. And you also kind of reminded me of the people's comments of, oh, we don't like too different of Star Wars movies. Okay, we'll give you Force Awakens. Oh, it's too the same. People are extremely picky, I feel like. And I'm pretty sure that it kind of sounds like we were kind of in the same generation of Star Wars, we had the originals to watch and everything, but then we were kind of second generation, I think you said, as the prequels came out and as the special editions and things like that. So I think we were kind of in the same thing growing up, it sounds like. I do also agree with you that today, the New Hope script, I don't know if it could have been made, or if it would have been as successful, because it was for the time and the way that things were done. And today, filmmaking is very odd, today. I feel like you have to do certain things to gain attention, and a lot of that in turn, is these action movies that are like all about explosions, but the plot's not very good. Or, you know, Hollywood isn't creative, so let's do a reboot, or let's do that. So the idea of a New Hope script coming out today, I don't think it would have worked. I agree with you. I think it had to be for that time period, for that generation, to make it what Star Wars is today. And Rogue One, too. I don't want you guys think that I'm like completely bashing the movie, but you know, it's not one of my favorites, but I do understand the love for that movie because my dad, he is a huge fan, obviously, of Star Wars. He's the one that got me into Star Wars, and he absolutely loves that movie. It's one of his favorite movies in the Star Wars world. So I completely understand how people love Rogue One. For me, I prefer the second half of it compared to the first half, and that's just some timing things and storyline things. But, you know, to each their own. Everyone has their own Star Wars ranking list, if you will, but I do get why people love and imagined how those Death Star plans were stolen and seeing it come to life and tied directly into New Hope. You know, I mean, it's like a jump away from New Hope, so I do like how that easily connects into the original trilogy. And yes, I do agree with you that I do not think that Disney is ruined, and it seems to be doing very well with, like, you know, the Disneyland parks and all the new things. Disney is blowing up. It is crazy. With all of the new movies and everything, like I said, I do tend to worry that they might do too much or overdo it, but time will tell with those things. I could be completely wrong, or, you know, time will tell. So thank you, Bryant, for sharing those thoughts. So next up, we have Douglas sharing his answers to my questions.
Okay, this is my addition for Calming Escape, Cassie's podcast. I'm just going to go through the questions now that I was asked to do regarding the Star Wars Expanded Universe. What is your opinion of the Disney version of Star Wars? To me, I guess I could say that my opinion of it is it's still kind of the same old Star Wars, really. I mean, I know a lot of people freaked out when the old Expanded Universe got tossed, but it was very fortunate that a lot of the old writers got brought back so they could continue with stories. And maybe there have been a little bit changes to the Star Wars formula, but sometimes, not to do the old cliche, but changes can actually be pretty good. I mean, adding new stuff to the mythos. But at the same time, they've kept what's old and worked, and that was, going into question 2, would you have preferred that the legend stories ever be brought to the big screen? I'm probably going to be a controversial opinion here and say, no, not really. Because a lot of the old Expanded Universe stuff was made at a time when the only movies, the only mainstream Star Wars stuff was A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And as more stuff got added to the official stuff, like the prequels and the Clone Wars show, that you started seeing some contradictions in a lot of the old EU stuff. So I don't know if it's even really possible to bring what is now Legends, like to bring it as it was into the Star Wars universe now. Rather, I'd prefer that LucasArts, Disney do what they've been doing and take the elements that worked from the old Expanded Universe and pull them in and integrate them in a more natural way. As for the last question, has Disney ruined Star Wars? I'm going to say no. Again, probably controversial opinion, but I feel they have not really ruined Star Wars. I know Last Jedi was a divisive film, but I personally think on its own merits it succeeds. Now, that being said, I feel I have to say there is the potential to maybe not ruin Star Wars, but drive it downhill with oversaturation. That ultimately, maybe a Star Wars film every single year is not such a good idea, even if it's not focused on the main storyline. I mean, the books do a great job of opening up the expanded universe and showing the whole bigger picture to people, but those are things they can go at their own pace, and I feel like with a book you don't get so much of a been there, done that feel that we get from seeing a movie. And as an aside, I'd like to share that when the new canon kind of got started, I was fortunate enough to meet with one of the writers who had written for the old canon and the new canon, and he phrased it in a pretty interesting way. He brought up 2 great points, actually, I think. The first was Disney spent $4.3 billion to purchase LucasArts to get the rights to Star Wars. So basically, that's a huge chunk of change. So quite honestly, what they want to do with Star Wars, they are free to do so. And second, and probably more important, what he said is, everyone's so afraid when it got rid of, but it's not like Disney is going to kick down your door, take your old Star Wars Legends stuff, and burn it, and you'll never see it again. The best thing about these stories is, canon or not, they still exist, and they can still be enjoyed by everyone. And honestly, that's what's going to prevent Star Wars, I think, from Disney from ruining or things going downhill, is look for good stories to tell, because that's the most important thing. And so long as there are good stories, I'll keep enjoying A Galaxy Far, Far Away. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Douglas. So I do like your mention of, like, take the elements that worked in the Legend series and bring them into, like, the Disney now canon. And I do agree with you that there is the potential to drive these Star Wars films downhill, and that a Star Wars film maybe every year isn't needed. That's kind of like my same thinking, is that maybe they're planning too many things, not just like the main ones, but the side ones, the new trilogies and the new shows they're planning. It might be too much. It might just do too many things to where we lose sight of why people like the core of Star Wars, if that makes any sense. Why people have been fans for so many years, why it's been, spread through generations, like my dad introduced me, I would introduce my kids, things like that. Why it's been such a big fan base. Would they potentially drive that downhill with too many side things? That's really cool that you got to meet one of the writers, and I do completely agree with what he said, that, it's not like Disney's going to take away those legend stories. As I said, I'm always going to reference them. I'm always going to remember Jason and Jaina Solo, or like Ben Skywalker, Mara Jade, those different things, those different characters that we don't have anymore. I'm still going to remember those, and I can still go and read those, or I can still, think about those and separate the two, obviously, because they don't just disappear now that Disney has created a new canon. So I do like that we can still hold on to those things if we see fit. Alright, so next up we have Ryan sharing his answers.
Well, I have enjoyed the Disney movies. They're not perfect, but they're fun and interesting and entertaining. That's how I feel, anyway. I saw The Last Jedi with my wife, and she hadn't seen a Star Wars movie in a long time. And she wasn't really interested in Star Wars, but she just saw the movie, for me. But she left the theater saying that she loved the movie, and she wanted to see more Star Wars. And so after seeing the Last Jedi, we went home and watched The Phantom Menace. And talk about an imperfect movie. The prequels weren't perfect. The Disney movies aren't perfect. But it's all a new part of something that I love, the Star Wars series. I thought Rogue One was the best Star Wars movie. And I know that's probably not a very popular opinion, but I liked the darker tone, and I liked that it was about ordinary people who have to fight the bad guys with ordinary means and aren't space wizards with laser swords. I have no problem with lightsabers or the Jedi or the Sith or the Force, but I liked seeing a story that was told from a different perspective. So yes, I like the Disney movies, and I am looking forward to seeing the next one. Regarding the Star Wars Legends stories, formerly the Expanded Universe, I would love to see, Splinter the Mind's Eye, and Heir to the Empire. I personally really liked Crucible, and of course the Thrawn trilogy. It would be great to see Vector Prime, books like that. So yes, I would like to see that, but those things aren't aren't canon anymore. Most of what used to be the expanded universe isn't canon anymore. And that was obviously and understandably a controversial decision. And this leads into the third question. Making those things non-canon, taking them out of canon, and basically orphaning the entire expanded universe was understandably a controversial decision, because we have such great stories and in the expanded universe, and it spans millennia. You know, the expanded universe was enormous. I mean, it still is. It still exists. It's out there. There's Star Wars stories for you to enjoy. They're just not canon anymore. But I can understand the bind that Disney was in when they wanted to make more Star Wars. They wanted to tell stories, you know, that took place after Return of the Jedi. But there were already stories in place, many stories in place. There was already canon there. So it was either make one of those stories, you know, and tell the story of Jason Solo, you know, or it was make your own brand new story. And they could have gone either way. They could have. I can understand why maybe they wanted to draw in new audiences and not just Star Wars fans, but I mean, this is me struggling to justify their decision, and I don't know that it's necessarily my place to justify that decision. It was a big idea. Let's orphan the expanded universe, and it might not have been the best decision, but it was the decision that they made, and it gave us, so far, it's given us 3 good movies that have been enjoyable and fun. And those stories from the former expanded universe, the Star Wars Legend stories, still there. They still exist. You can still enjoy them. They're just not part of canon. And I have never really been I guess kind of a canon slave kind of person, where it's like, you know, you only want to read stories that are part of the official canon. But I do understand the mindset of people who feel that way. I understand where they're coming from. So, would I like to see Star Wars Legends stories on the screen? Yes. There's plenty to choose from. And it's not impossible. They absolutely could do it. They might. It would be great to see, you know, the Thrawn trilogy. I mean, they would probably boil it down to one movie, which would be bad, but yes, the answer to that question is yes, I would love to see that. And the answer to the third question, did Disney ruin Star Wars? I don't think that they did. I think that even though they scrapped the EU and went with their own stories, and you know, they have a bad guy that's not a Sith Lord, and even though they did what they did, all the stuff that you like about Star Wars still exists. It's still there. It's not made any less good because of what they changed. Because of the present, you know, the past is not made less golden by the present. So did Disney ruin Star Wars? No. Disney changed Star Wars in a huge way, and I'm not entirely sure that they're completely aware of the scope of the changes that they made. But they didn't ruin Star Wars, in my opinion. They just changed it, And I am hopeful, I'm optimistic that more good things are to come, and that the body of Star Wars stories out there, I mean, it's only going to get bigger. There's just going to be more Star Wars, and that's a good thing.
All right, thank you so much, Ryan. Definitely agree with you, you know. The Disney-verse canon is not perfect. Neither were the prequels, but they are very entertaining, and I do get that. I really like that you mentioned that your wife, like, wasn't really interested in Star Wars, but after seeing Last Jedi, you know, wanted to see more. And I think that's very interesting because, like, as we said, Disney is trying to make movies that are more open for finding new fans, you could say. So while you have been a fan for years, maybe your wife wasn't, but maybe she'll more get into Star Wars after seeing Last Jedi. So I like that you included that, and it does, you know, there's nothing wrong with making entertaining movies or making movies that get more fans like Disney is doing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I also think that it's very important to have that happy medium of, like, the entertaining movie that will get a lot of people to the theater and, like, respecting the fandom and the fans that have been around for decades. And you mentioned Rogue One, as several people have, and I did like that the people are more normal. You get to see a different side of Star Wars with this movie. As I said, Rogue One is a war movie. That is what makes it different from the other movies. Yes, there are wars going on with the other ones, but Rogue One feels like a historical look at a galaxy far, far away. It feels like more of a war movie instead of the regular, like, trilogy or prequels or whatnot feel like the different storylines that happen to be going on with a war mixed in, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And so I did, with that aspect of Rogue One, I did enjoy that the characters were more regular, more normal people, because that's something that we didn't really get to see, was all of the people that were helping the rebellion in the original trilogy. Obviously you got to see people here and there on the different bases and things like that, but it was like a huge group of people, and you get to see more of that in Rogue One. That's part of the reason I enjoy the second half of Rogue One more than the first half. It's just a little slow for me, but the second half you get to see more of, like, you know, the war stuff, more of the people that are trying to help the rebellion. You get to see the Yavin base, you get to see that the Death Star plans getting taken. So I do appreciate that half of the movie and getting to see that part of Star Wars that it's been talked about, it's been mentioned, you assume that happens, but in the original trilogy you didn't get to see it happen, and they did that for us with Rogue One. And like a few of us have said, you know, the legend stories, or like the expanded stories, they're still there for us to enjoy. Disney hasn't taken that away from us. You know, we might miss pieces, like I have said, but, you know, we can still enjoy them, and if we have to kind of separate the two in our minds, or however, you know, you guys have it work, I kind of have them separated sometimes. Sometimes I mix them because my mind is all the crazy Star Wars-ness. And then I also liked how you said that Disney hasn't ruined Star Wars, it's simply changed Star Wars, and I agree with that as well. Alright, our next one is from Josh.
Hey Cassie, thanks for having me on your podcast. So I'll be really quick on the first question about my opinion of Disney's version of Star Wars. I'll just say Disney, although they've done a lot to be able to bring more fans to the table, especially young kids who've never experienced Star Wars the way a lot of adults have when they first got to see a Star Wars movie for the first time. They really failed to do an original storyline. They said they did when they got rid of Expanded Universe, and then they called it Legends, but honestly, they took those stories and they kind of pulled them all apart and rewrote them all into what seems like it's an original storyline, but it's actually, you know, it's all been done before, even from the original trilogy. So I really don't have a great opinion of them at the current moment. Hopefully it'll change, but for now, they haven't really done anything to impress me, just quite the opposite, actually. So on the second question, about Legends, I would have loved Legends to have been included on screen some way. Anything from, Legends, or as I prefer to call it myself expanded universe, because it'll always be that to me. There are so many stories they could do, whether it's from the time period of the original trilogy or afterwards to thousands of years before. No one's really explored a time period around, characters like Darth Revan, to put it on screen. They have video games, but I would love to see that done on screen in some way that would really capture those stories in a really wonderful light, like the original trilogy. And if Disney has ruined Star Wars, I wouldn't say ruined at this point. There's been amazing ticket sales from the movies, grossing over $1 billion. But, honestly, they're Star Wars movies. They've had this fan base that's been building since 1977 up to now. So people are always going to go see a Star Wars movie. It could be a cartoon. It could be, just slapped together at the last minute, basically. And people are still going to go see a Star Wars movie. That's just how it is. But honestly, until they really get more original stories, which, haven't seen the Solo movie because it hasn't come out yet, which I hope to. That might change my opinion. But until they get more things that are more original, instead of saying that they're, got rid of Legends and claiming they have original content, until that happens, they're just going to keep ruining it until they can come up with something absolutely that has not been done. The storyline has not been done. That does not replicate anything from Legends or anything like that from Expanded Universe. That's all their own. That is when they will finally get high praise from me. But until that happens, it's just going to stay the same.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts as well. So, obviously, you were not impressed with the new movies, and I totally understand those various opinions. Like I said, I bounce around. I do enjoy the new movies, but then I have those downfalls as well. So I definitely understand where people are coming from when they say that they're not impressed with them, or that they are not original, or that they're pulling from other things. It's things we've seen before. I totally get that when people explain those things. So I do see both sides. It's so funny, I'm so used to calling it like the Legends now, like when you said the expanded universe, I was like, yeah, I used to call it that all the time, but I'm just so used to them now referring to it as the Legend stories, which is probably kind of sad. But you are right, with the ticket sales and, everything, the growing fan base since 77, as you said, you're pretty much spot on with, it doesn't matter, what type of Star Wars movie they put out, because it is Star Wars, people will go and see it. And that's kind of in the boat that I'm in, honestly, because I am such a big Star Wars fan. I want to see the content, even if I may not like it. Like this Solo movie, I am very nervous about it. I have a feeling I'm not going to like it. And I could completely prove myself wrong. I will, of course, let you guys know. But I'm worried I won't like it, but I'm still going to go see it. The Boba Fett movie. I have absolutely no interest in that movie. I'm not as fascinated with Boba Fett as everyone else seems to be. But I will go see it. The new trilogy and the new show and everything, I will still watch these things. So I think you're completely spot on with the fact that these Star Wars fans that have started since 1977 all the way up into young kids that are just discovering Star Wars, people will still go see it because it is a Star Wars movie. And honestly, that was probably a pretty good business move on Disney's part, because they probably knew that. They could make the shittiest movie ever, and if it's Star Wars, they'd probably still make money off of it because it has the Star Wars name. It's set in a galaxy far, far away, so they're guaranteed to make money off of it. Which is good and bad. As someone previously said, sometimes mixing arts or the passion that George Lucas had for the original trilogy into business and money can sometimes be bad. Sometimes, that's just how life works. That's how our world works, unfortunately. So sometimes it can be good and bad. Perhaps the more originality that you're looking for will come in the separate trilogy that they're going to be doing, the one that's away from the main, I don't even know what they're calling it. I just know they're going to be doing another trilogy that is away from the Skywalker family. So maybe you'll get some originality with that, or the TV show. I mean, time will tell, because we honestly have no idea what's coming. We don't even know what's coming for episode 9, so maybe you'll get some originality in that. I don't know. They don't let me read the scripts. They should. Alright guys, so the last one that I have, I'm going to actually read for you because it was a little write-in answer. So thank you, Jeffrey, for writing in some of your answers so I could share on this podcast. So the first question being, what is your opinion of the Disney version of Star Wars? He put, I don't mind them. As long as it's Star Wars, it's fine with me. I like how they keep the original characters as well as the new ones. So far, it's been good. I'm still on the fence of the Solo one, though. I don't know if I will see that one. So that's kind of like what we were saying, you know, like as long as it's Star Wars, it's fine, but a lot of people are on the fence with Solo. So the second question was, would you have preferred the Legend stories to be brought to the big screen? And he put, yes, I would. And then, has Disney ruined Star Wars? No, they haven't yet. Keyword yet. I said before, I'm not hooked on the new Solo movie yet, and I really don't think I'll be seeing it, like, exploring Han's origins, but it just doesn't look good to me. I'm probably going to save my money for Deadpool. And that's like the thing too, you know, there's a lot of competing things for, like, you know, like different fandom, different fan bases, you know. Star Wars, like, was such a big thing, like, when the original trilogy came out, we didn't really have, you know, the Marvel movies to compete against it. We didn't have, like, other fandoms or things to kind of go against it in that capacity, I guess you could say. Like, compared to today, we have, like, so many different things, and, you know, when not everyone can go to the theater every time, you know, sometimes movie theater tickets are hella expensive, it's ridiculous. So sometimes people have to pick and choose. So, you know, in his case, you know, he wants to see Deadpool instead of Solo, so Disney kind of has to think about that too. While everyone is going to try and see a Star Wars movie at some point, some people will have to pick and choose if they have to, if that makes any sense. Alright guys, thank you so much for taking part in this podcast with me. I really appreciate each of you that sent in your thoughts and were able to share your Star Wars opinions with my lovely listeners. So I'm pretty sure that I've covered my own answers within this episode, but just to sum it up, what is your opinion of the Disney version of Star Wars? I enjoy them. Some of them have some of my favorite parts, while other sections are not my favorites. I have that nice mix of things of, yes, I really enjoy this part, or a little bit of a letdown because I would have preferred something else. Would you have preferred the Legend stories to be brought to the big screen? Some of them, yes. Maybe not all of them, but yes, some of them I really wanted to see on the big screen. Some of the characters, some of the, like, storylines and ideas I would have preferred to see instead of some of the storylines that Disney has now created. And has Disney ruined Star Wars? Not for me. I still love Star Wars just as much as ever, and I probably always will. I do worry that they may push it too bit, you know, a bit too far, but I will continue to watch and view what they come up with and see how they do, maybe hoping for, you know, something fantastic and amazing, but to be honest, I don't think anything that they produce in the future will ever beat the original trilogy. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that most Star Wars fans feel that way. I do hope that you guys have enjoyed this podcast. I was so happy to feature like a few new voices on this episode. And if you enjoyed that little new feature, please let me know, and maybe I will try and feature more people in future episodes when I need some other opinions or some other thoughts. It was really fun to include them, so let me know if you enjoyed that. I loved hearing the mix of Star Wars thoughts and opinions from different people, different ages, different like experiences with Star Wars. I thought that that would be perfect for this episode. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. So thank you again to Alex and Ralph and Joe, Brian, Douglas, Ryan, Josh, and Jeffrey. I do really appreciate you guys taking the time to record your thoughts for my podcast. I think this might have been one of my favorite episodes so far. I did have a lot of fun with it. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will catch you on the next Chit Chat with Cass. May the Force be with you.